Until next time.
This is Legacy 1891, preserving the past for the future. Good afternoon, Vikings and Viking community. This is Legacy 1891. I am Glen Bowman, and as kind of the unofficial historian of Elizabeth City State University, my podcast, as I explained in an earlier episode, is going to be focusing on the history of this proud institution. Today, we know this institution as Elizabeth City State University. And over the last 134, going on 135 years, this institution has undergone many changes. It has evolved into what it is today. And anyone who comes to this campus today will see a number of things. We'll see a lot of students from a variety of disciplines and degree programs. We will see some pristine new buildings. We will see a brand new residence hall. We will see a brand new dining facility that is top-notch. And we will see a community around this campus. When this school was established in March 1891, this area where we're sitting here in the studio was simply just barren land. We were previously other names. Before we were Elizabeth City State University, we had other identities, other names, other missions. And what I want to do today is I want to kind of set the stage briefly as to how this institution has evolved in the years, starting back. And so I'm going to talk about four major changes, and I'm going to go all the way back, because this is history. This is a podcast about the Legacy 1891, so I'm going to go very back to the beginning. It goes, some say, and it's generally true, is that the person who was responsible, who did the most, was not an educator, but actually a legislator, a black legislator from this county, Pasquotank County, named Hugh Cale. And it is true that, yes, legislator Hugh Cale, in March 1891, set forth a bill in the North Carolina General Assembly, and that bill was successfully passed and later signed into law by the governor. That really, in many ways, does begin the story, and that's why we celebrate every March Founders Day. But even before then, there was something special about North Carolina. I mean, North Carolina at this time was an impoverished state. It was one of the poorest in the South, and many have forgotten this, but it was actually a state that had one of the highest levels of illiteracy. This region, though, seemed to buck the trend. There had been a history of interest in education in this region. This area had a traditionally large free black population. A famous historian named John Hope Franklin actually wrote a book about the free blacks in North Carolina. And this area was one of the leading parts of the state in that regard. So there was always kind of an interest in education. But when we were established, we were called the Elizabeth City State Colored Normal School. Now, there are a couple specific words were chosen. First thing, we were founded, and we still are, a state-supported public institution. But note also that we were not the public institution that we are today. Today, this institution serves a wide variety of people, breaking through racial barriers and such. But that wasn't always the case. When we were founded, we were the Elizabeth City State Colored Normal School. Now, sometimes people really don't quite understand what was meant. And I think people would probably have figured out that by color, they were referring to the mission. This goal was to serve and to train black educators. We were a normal school. We were not a university. We were not anything like a community college. We weren't even what you would call today a high school. Essentially, a normal school provided 4 years past primary education and teacher training. So in many ways, the grades that this school would represent today would be grades 5 through 8, because primary school generally ended around grade 4. The goal was to provide teachers. The state funded this to train teachers. And that was the mission. That was what this institution was about. And the goal, of course, was to have our graduates go out and serve in the counties in the Black primary schools. Now, time has somehow erased a lot of this, but many counties in North Carolina and the South did not have anything like the elaborate, fancy brick structures that we think of today as schools. Mostly education took place in one-room schoolhouses, and Pasquotank County had about a dozen Black primary schools that served essentially children. This area did not have a high school that was public for either Blacks or whites until the early 20th century. So the closest thing that a Black North Carolinian could receive an education would be this institution. And it was free. Tuition was free. The promise was that a person who finished would have to teach in the public schools for at least a year. That was the arrangement. That was kind of the contract of sort. So that really was our foundation. Now, this campus did not even have buildings. Some have forgotten this too. Some of those in the local community are already aware of this because they've heard me talk about this before. But when we were established in 1891, we did not have a permanent campus. A normal school was more or less a concept. The state of North Carolina, like other states, could simply just take away the funding and then or move the school to another location. So it's not as if this campus was going to be permanent. It was always a matter of, let's see how next year goes along. So it was not until 1912 that this institution actually had a permanent campus. And the campus buildings that exist today that were part of that campus, there's only one surviving building, and we call that building today Lane Hall. The Lane Hall that exists now looked nothing like the Lane Hall that existed back in 1912 when the first classes were held on the permanent campus. There was also a women's residence hall later called Samara Hall, and that was destroyed in the late 1940s due to a storm, and it was rebuilt, and that was closed right before I came here to ECSU, and it was raised a few years ago. So now that is empty land. The training, the teacher training education was not necessarily, we think of academic. Over the first several decades, an emphasis was on what they called industrial education. And industrial education, in some ways, could be a positive thing, but it also had a negative connotation with it as well. The idea was that Black North Carolinians needed to learn some kind of practical trade so they could make a living. And that meant that for women, many of them were trained to be domestic workers, domestic servants. Many of them left here with their certificates and went on to serve in households in this area and elsewhere. Young men learned trades as well, and much of the campus today was actually consisted of farms. I know Ms. Hendrickson has pictures of the farms in the archive, but early on, many times students were taught agriculture and they literally did their craft here on this campus. So our roots, the whole idea of a modern-day university was not anything recognized and realized during the early decades. Eventually, North Carolina became very serious about teacher training. In the early days, a teacher did not even need what we call today a high school diploma in order to be able to teach. Over time, the State Department of Public Instruction, State Superintendent of Public Instruction's office, decided that it was time to elevate the standards for teaching. And so by the 1930s, it became state law that a primary school teacher would need to have the equivalent of a 4-year degree. In 1921, this campus went to and offered a 2-year normal program, but in the 1930s, it was decided that this campus needed to be offering a 4-year degree. And so that was to be the case, and so it was made into law, and this campus was now going to be able to offer a bachelor's degree, a Bachelor of Science in Elementary Education. The first graduates walked on the platform of what today is Moore Hall. And anybody who's visited Moore Hall in the last 5 to 10 years knows that Moore Hall Auditorium has been renovated to what it looked like back in the 1920s when it opened. And so that stage you see today looks almost, if not exactly like the stage on which those 26 graduates walked in May 1939. So that meant a name change. And so we were no longer State Normal School. We were now the Elizabeth City State Teachers College. So we became a baccalaureate institution. We were able to offer degrees. But let's put this in perspective here. Students who come to this campus can choose from dozens of degree programs, 2-3 dozen degree programs, all from a variety of fields. Students who came to this campus in 1939 and into the 1940s and into the 1950s had one choice for a degree program. We offered one program, and that was the BS in elementary education. The state of North Carolina had decided that that was going to be our mission, and there were a few other schools in the state that had a similar mission. These were also once normal schools, and these schools are our sister schools. Anybody who watches football or listens to the games on WRVS knows that we play Fayetteville State, we play Winston-Salem State. Those were schools like us who were teacher training schools, once normal schools that became teachers' colleges. And so the focus was going to be still on teacher training, but now we were going to the bachelor's level. And over the time, this school had survived many challenges. We had survived the early 20th century white supremacy movement in North Carolina. We had survived consolidation that closed down a number of black normal schools. We had survived the Great Depression. In the 1940s, we were going to survive World War II, a time when male student enrollment was completely devastated. In general, a black young man who was literate would be prized as a recruit and would be drafted into military service during the Second World War. So that meant that this school had very few men, but we survived that as well. In time, though, things started to change, especially after the Second World War. Many people have heard of the GI Bill, and that was a way for returning servicemen and servicewomen in general to be able to earn a degree so they could receive some training and have a career. Historically, traditionally, most what we call today professional occupations were largely closed to blacks in the South. And that needs to be restated because it is very important, is that for many, many, many decades, an able black North Carolinian could not just become anything he or she wanted to be. There were professions that were cut off from them. And so this campus did not need to offer programs in those fields because those opportunities were not open to them. But things started to change in the 1950s and early 1960s. And it was time that the state of North Carolina realized that this school had an opportunity to serve what was now a changing job field. That meant that the civil rights movement was able to open up doors that had previously been closed to black Americans. And so that meant that this school had an opportunity to offer new programs in new fields that were now going to be open. But that would take time. In 1963, we once again had a name change, and this campus became Elizabeth City State College. So in other words, we removed the teachers. Now, some people think, oh, you remove the teachers. That's not a good thing to remove teachers from the classroom. That's not what it was about. The focus was that we were going to be not just offering education. Education would remain our bread and butter. And I would say in many ways, it still is today to a large degree because this campus serves this community and this region by its teachers. And I know for a fact that many of my former students have gone on to become teachers here in this region, and they're successful. So that's still part of our mission. But starting in 1963, now that we were a state college, we were going to be able to offer newer programs. So that meant that students could not just major in elementary education, but other fields. But these fields were still limited. Many of these early degree programs were still limited to education, but many of them focused on offering opportunities to teach in secondary schools. For example, a student could major in business education and then teach business at a secondary school, middle school, or high school. So the focus was, we were getting there towards offering new programs. We were not a bona fide university, but this campus was changing. And I should say that this campus continued to serve the community, and the student body had a key role in that. In the 1960s, speaking of the civil rights movement, many of our students were highly active in the local civil rights movement in this town. It was students who went downtown in February 1960 and decided that they were going to conduct a sit-in at a lunch counter in a department store on East Main Street. There's now a marker that recognizes that accomplishment. So when I say the campus mission changed, students were actually becoming more involved in the rest of the community. They were now making a difference more than they were able to before. And so as we started to expand new programs into new areas, this campus was going to enjoy a surge in enrollment. And I know the pictures in the archives sometimes point us out about how crowded the campus became in the 1960s. There's a famous picture I have, and it's about a huge line for food. In those days, the cafeteria was in Lane Hall, and the line went out the door all the way almost to Moore Hall. Now, if you've been on campus, you know that Moore Hall and Lane Hall, they're not all that far apart, but they're not that close either. So you know that there was some definite overcrowding going on. In the 1960s, there were some campuses that were interested in becoming full-fledged universities. The problem was, though, that many of the authorities in the state, and I should say also the three schools that were part of what was at that time and still is called the University of North Carolina system, did not want to open the doors to those schools. Finally, in 1969, the General Assembly decided that it was time to make this institution a full-fledged university. And we became then what we are now, ECSU, Elizabeth City State University. So what does that mean? How was a university different than a normal school or a teacher's college? A university now offered programs that were not even touching on education. And as we had chancellors like Marion Thorpe and Jimmy Jenkins, they often offered new programs that had never been offered before at a black teacher's college or a black college, because those occupations were now open to all because of the civil rights movement. And among the many programs, some of these programs that were created were cutting-edge programs that now are among our most popular. Criminal justice was actually called police science technology when it began. Now it's a thriving major. Social work, sociology. Social work started off as an offshoot in sociology, and now social work is its own bona fide discipline. Students can here study business, but not just business education, but they can study finance and accounting and marketing and management and sorts, entrepreneurship. And even this studio would not have existed really as part of a teacher's college, because that was not the mission. But when this itself an institution, this station opened in 1986, it reflected the expanding mission and the change in educational focus, because as we know, many students work here in the radio station. Many of our graduates come back and work in the radio station, or they work elsewhere in media and in journalism. So this station itself shows us what it means to be a university. So as this university has evolved to what it is now, and we look around campus and we just see how much has changed, it really understates the point. Because in 1891, when this institution came into being, there was literally nothing here. No one lived here. Nothing was really grown here for the most part. There were a few farms around here before this campus was established in this location in 1912, but this was outside of town. This was considered to be the outskirts. This was kind of more like the suburbs of Elizabeth City. And now today, this is part of Elizabeth City. People live here, people work here, people serve here. And in that time, we just see here the growing outreach, the growing connection with the community, because this campus is now indeed part of the community. Before I close, I want to add one point, and many of you are aware of this, and you hear this on the station, WRVS, wonderful radio Viking style. What does it mean to be a Viking? The reason why we are called the Vikings in the first place is because of the students back from the early 1960s. And this is kind of a little factoid I want to leave you here with today. Historically, when this school started to play in competitive athletics, we were identified as the Pirates. Makes sense. We're near the ocean. There used to be pirates out in the Atlantic. Why not be the Pirates? Pirates are tough. Pirates want to win. Pirates want to leave the field with victory. Why the great name? Well, eventually, early on, we were not a part of the CIAA, as we were able to join and become accepted in the late 1950s. We were allowed to join under one condition. Hampton Institute, that was the Pirates. They did not want to have two sets of Pirates in the conference. You might say, well, why? Because the SEC has both the LSU Tigers and the Missouri Tigers. What's the big deal? Hampton wasn't always a big fan of having little working class North Carolina, small school, not elite Elizabeth City State in the conference. And so they were saying, you need to change that name. Well, we put that off for a number of years until finally in 1963, we were told, listen here, you need to change that name. And so what happened was the president, Walter Ridley, and he had an idea. He wanted us to be called the Vikings. Coach Bobby Vaughn, men's basketball coach, department chair in physical education, athletic director, man of all trades, he wanted us to be called the Buccaneers. Both alternative sets of Pirates. Well, the students had a debate in Moore Hall, and eventually they decided, and they weighed the pros and cons of both. And so it was decided that students had a vote, and the students voted on the Vikings. So that's where the V comes for WRVS. That's why we are known as the Mighty Vikings. And that is part of our institutional identity, as is a resilience. The resilience marks us. It's part of who we are. It's part of who we were. It's a part of where we're going. That resilience is part about being a Viking. And so I'll end this legacy, 1891 chapter. And I hope in the coming weeks and months to give you some other glimpses. So you're not just listening to me, but hearing from other voices who can tell you this story in their own little way as we continue to work towards preserving the past for the future. Have a great day, Vikings.